Hi everyone, my name is Kendall, and this is my class reflection of etst 300. So starting in Module 1, we begin to talk about intersectionality and how identities interlock and influence each of our own experiences. So specifically pertaining to this class, we are focusing on women of color or queer women of color. So we know that they hold at least 3 target identities, which are race, gender, and sexuality. Because they have 3 interlocking target identities, we know that they face more barriers and difficulties in their lives due to systems of oppression. These systems include, but are not limited to, racism, sexism, heterosexism, colonialism, etc. In this module, we specifically learn that institutional racism and sexism operate at societal and institutional levels and affect everyone in their day-to-day lives, whether that is deeming a person with power or oppression. We also learn in this module that some people who have several target identities begin to internalize that they are not good enough because they do not have dominant identities. We can see this through our readings and our other course material. In Module 2, or moving on to Module 2, in Module 2, we begin to learn what constitutes as intersectionality and the ways in which queer women of color represent themselves. We learn about how identities work together to create individual experiences, and we also learn that all identities affect each other simultaneously. I personally loved this module because I learned about decolonial imagery and the beauty of being authentic and owning one's culture. I thought it was really cool to see all of the women creating art that represented themselves in their own unique ways. And when they were doing this, like living authentically and believing that they are talented and smart and beautiful, they are not allowing the patriarchy and heteronormativity to influence them and make them small or make themselves fit into the molds that society wants them to fit into. So, moving on to Module 3. In Module 3, we learn about the umbrella term queer, and how many different people with different sexualities can identify as queer. The module also talks about how race and sexuality can conflict at times, but they can and should be harmonious, specifically talking about communities and how a queer woman of color can be a part of the LGBTQ community, but then also a part of their racial, ethnic identity. In this module, I learned that these women shouldn't have to choose. They should be able to be a part of both. And when they live that way, they are able to create their own narrative and encourage other women, queer women of color who are just like them, to be a part of both communities at the same time, and maybe even create a community where their gender identity reflects their gender, and race identity can hold the same space. I hope that makes sense. But then in Module 4, moving on to Module 4 identifies theoretical models used by queer women of color. Specifically, we talked about the queer theories queer women of color use. So the queer theory that we talked about in the slides often left out people of color, people who are poor, people identified as bisexual, lesbian, and or transgender. So queer women of color, created queer theory, which is truly acknowledging and embodying intersectionality. So when queer theories acknowledge intersectionality and do not keep out certain people like the original queer theory does, queer theory can improve and become more complex. When it is improved, the community as a whole can better fight heteronormativity, homophobia, colonialism, racism, sexism, etc. Overall, I really enjoyed this class. I really loved being able to focus on queer women of color. Oftentimes in my other classes, I feel like we're only focusing on like one target identity rather than like 2 or 3. So I really enjoyed this class. I learned a lot, and thank you for I'm so sorry. I nannied for 10 hours. But thank you for everyone for sharing their what they've learned in this class and the art that you all shared. I really loved this class a lot. So thanks.